in this talk, he actually talks about you can take a movie at its literal, and you can also you should be working on two levels. You should be taking
Mm.
a film in its literal sense, and you should also be taking a film in its metaphorical senses.
To
So
that point where because he says, and Joe Rogan's like, do when people go see the film, do they think about the like this deep metaphor?
deep
He's like,
metaphor.
most of the time, no. Most of the time, they're just going to go see an entertaining film. And Guy Ritchie says this: I am a storyteller, therefore, it's my job to know these things.
Hello and welcome to the Brothers Random Show. My name is Travis,
I'm Michael.
and we are two ordinary brothers discussing extraordinary ideas and some random shit. Michael, why are we here?
Today, we are talking about a new video put out by After Skool called the Master Your Own Kingdom. Now, this After Skool is illustrator, and he'll do like a clip of the conversation or talk and illustrate it. It's really cool. It's great to watch. Recommend it. But we're just going to kind of use this to start the discussion. Now, Master Your Own Kingdom was a talk from Guy Ritchie on Joe Rogan's Joe Rogan Experience, and Guy Ritchie was promoting King Arthur, the film he had just finished and was coming out.
If you don't own something, you're not the boss. You have to take full responsibility for everything that you do. Why be subservient? You must be the master of your own kingdom.
I feel you. Makes a lot of sense.
You've got to own that. You can't just walk into things with your eyes half open. You've got to walk into things with your eyes fully open. You've got to know what you're getting into. You have to take possession of your life.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Guy Ritchie is a fairly famous filmmaker. He's done many. He started his career making British gangster films like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and also Snatch, which are excellent films. He's done a lot of music videos, specifically like a lot of Madonna music videos, because he was married to Madonna for many years, but we won't hold that against him. But he also did Wrath of Man more recently, and The Covenant, which you and I reviewed about a year ago. And his most recent movie was The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. This this talk that he gave is almost more impressive than the movie that he's promoting at the time. The movie was called King Arthur: The Legend of the Sword. It starred
one of my favorite films, but we can get into that.
It starred Charlie Hunnam. It did not do well at the box office. It was from 2017. It did very poorly, and lucky for Guy Ritchie, his next film was, I think, the live action Aladdin, and that was big success, even though I personally did not like that movie. But anyway, Guy Ritchie's latest works I have quite enjoyed, and his older works I quite enjoyed. There's a lot of muddle in the middle. But this specific conversation was with Joe Rogan, and they got very deep into mastering your own kingdom, becoming the best version of yourself,
the hero of your own story,
the hero of your own story,
the hero's journey.
They go into the proverb of the prodigal son, which is so interesting. So if you don't know the proverb of the prodigal son, really quickly, I'll say there's two sons and a father. One son goes off into the world and makes a bunch of mistakes and comes back as a pauper. And
well, they have their inheritance, and one asks for his inheritance now. Basically cashes out. And then the older son stays on the farm and keeps working the farm.
Yeah, and he's the son that leaves squanders it. comes back and is received by the father with open arms, and the other son, the older son, is like, well, why are you receiving him so well? I stayed. And the point, so it's a strange story, but according to Guy Ritchie, and this is his own take on the story, is that the older son and the younger son are two versions of the same person.
Mhm.
And one is the version of you that is adventurous and gets out into the world, and the other one is the conservative one that stays home. And even when you go out into the world, you still need to return home, right? And I think what his take on it was is that in order to build your kingdom, you need to get out into the world and make mistakes. And
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this when we had Nathan Diltz on, but a lot of men aren't like leaving home, moving out of their mother's basement,
yes,
getting off the video games, getting off the porn, and going out and finding their personal legend. That's a throwback to The Alchemist, which is a great book. Anyways, and basically living out their own hero's journey. And Guy Ritchie kind of throws out that this is kind of the point of the story of Arthur, King Arthur. He needs to, grab the sword, and the sword kind of represents your a man's power of being able to take hold of and control and have competence in his environment. And he takes a hold of the sword, pulls it out, and finds his destiny, right? And takes control of the I guess you could say the situation, your life. You take control of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I find this film one of my most favorites. I love symbolism, and the whole film was just a symbolic tale. It was, and everything in it was just strewn throughout, was just symbolism. And I was there for it.
Well, and in this talk, he actually talks about you can take a movie at its literal, and you can also you should be working on two levels. You should be taking a film in its literal sense, and you should also be taking a film in its metaphorical senses. So just kind of go through some of the metaphors that stood out to you the most, Michael. In
yeah,
this,
well,
this
to
film.
that point where he says, and Joe Rogan's like, when people go see the film, do they think about this deep metaphor? He's like, most of the time, no. Most of the time, they're just going to go see an entertaining film. Mm-hmm. But I'm a storyteller. Guy Ritchie says this. I am a storyteller. Therefore, it's my job to know these things. Mm-hmm. And it's funny that he says this before this film, before King Arthur, The Legend of the Sword comes out, because it was so chock full of metaphor, right? Mm-hmm. Little things here and there that I kind of caught throughout. One is, it's interesting that these women draw him up out of the water, very Moses-like.
King Arthur, they draw him out of the water.
Yeah. In this story, they draw him up out of the water, and that's, I mean, what happened with in Exodus, the mm-hmm. Moses story, is that he was put on the water and then was found by a woman that cared for him, drew him up out of the water.
What do you think was the significance of the demons in the water that the villain, played by Jude Law, he had to give them sacrifices?
Dude, This is brilliant. First off, one thing I noticed, this was very interesting. There were 3 sirens and a fat blob
Yeah.
that was this monster figure that were
tentacles and all this kind of
yeah,
stuff.
he was they were the evil lurking underneath the castle that the Jude Law character would go down to and sacrifice something that he loved to get in order to get power.
Yes.
And
this may go back to the wrong sacrifices, like what Cain did. So
right,
he's sacrificing
and
so
jealousy.
Jude Law's jealousy.
I mean,
jealousy.
Yeah, because it was obvious he was jealous of his brother's kingdom.
Yes.
Now, and this is King Arthur's father.
Which
you don't get to know him very well.
Yeah.
But you see him as kind of starting out
as a benevolent ruler,
as the good king.
Yeah.
Right.
And then his brother betrays him.
Yep.
With sorcery. So there's a lot of magic in this movie, and maybe one of the reasons that it didn't do too well is because it was compared to Lord of the Rings a bunch. So
the evil that he sacrifices his family to, one thing I noticed is that's the only fat person in the whole film.
Huh.
And it made me wonder why
gluttony.
Why do that? Gluttony. Yeah.
I think he's a religious filmmaker. He may not be a religious man in the sense of like I go to a church or anything like that.
Yeah.
But he's got a lot of religious like The Wrath of Man is a Guy Ritchie movie. And in that The Wrath of Man is a very biblical sounding name. The movie's about revenge. So, and that was another good one of his. But anyway,
the Covenant. I mean,
the Covenant,
like the Covenant. That sounds that's
very biblical, very religious.
Yeah.
So he seems like he's a religious filmmaker. He seems like he's playing on another level. And it's sad to me that this movie did so poorly because it was at one point going to be a trilogy. They were going to make 3 of these. Charlie Hunnam was coming off some successes like Sons of Anarchy and stuff like that. But I mean, this idea of like the wrong sacrifice kind of plays into this because he's actually sacrificing his wife, and then later in the movie he sacrifices his daughter to gain the upper hand. And with these evil demons.
Spoilers. I mean, if you haven't seen the film,
we're not going to go too much into this film because the conversation's more about the after school video. But I mean, the film does present a lot of metaphor in it, and that is an interesting thing that I saw in it as well, is that Jude Law's character is evil and his purpose is evil, and so he's also giving the evil sacrifices to gain the upper hand. And what these sacrifices do is they give him kind of a fighting chance against the sword of power, because Excalibur in this is considered to be the sword of power. It's a very good versus evil thing, and that's another thing that I really miss in our movies nowadays, because we really don't have a lot of that going around. I think it's because people are confused nowadays about what's evil. So,
right, throughout the film, it's about King Arthur needing to basically face some of his inner demons in order to accept the kingship. Right. And the inner demons start with him as a boy watching his mother and father be killed. Throughout the film, he has these bad dreams where he sees the demon that killed his father, and he looks away, right, and runs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and his father tells him to run, right, after he also hurt him. And this is a little boy, he picks up the sword to give it to his father, and his father grabs the sword and cuts his hands and leaves a wound.
Now, is this the metaphor of your father must hurt you?
I think it's a metaphor that most all fathers will leave a wound in their son.
Or in their
and
children.
that wound,
that's a very interesting take, because the either intentional or unintentional.
Yes.
Because
either intentional, one or the other, or both, right?
Yeah.
And even the good king will probably leave a wound unintentionally.
Yeah, because you don't ever, if you're trying to be a good father and you're really working hard at it, you don't ever think to yourself that you're going to mess up your kids.
Yeah, I don't think anybody ever thinks that that's the case, but I'm sure that even if you are the best parent that you could possibly be, someday one of those kids are probably going to be laying on a therapist's couch saying, my dad expected too much of me, or
my dad yelled at me, or my dad spanked me, or
whatever the case, right?
But it's almost necessary. It's almost a necessary thing to instill that on them, because maybe they need that to become great.
I think yes. And they need now.
Maybe they need the wound.
Jordan Peterson talks about and this is old. It's in tons of old mythology, but it's depicted in Pinocchio, where the son has to go down into the belly of the beast to bring back the soul of his father. Now, and this is why I cry every time I watch this film, is because every time there's two parts where he's finally starting to look at his father's death, look at the demon that killed his father, right? To take on, and Ben, we had Ben on here once, and Ben told me this, and he's when we were talking about this film, and that was that as a boy he needed to look away, but as a man he needed to face it. So we're all going to be scarred in some way or another, but we have to use it.
But that might be life. Life scars us, and we need to use it.
Right. Yeah. So the sword cuts his hands, and it shows the scars a couple times in the film, but and then the father goes and he fights the demon. Now he loses, but he throws the sword up, and I'm like, what are they doing here? What is this? What does this mean? Right? Throws the sword up. It stabs his father in the back. I was just, what are they doing? What are they doing? Stabs him in the back, and he turns to stone. And his father literally becomes the stone where he draws the sword from. So in order for him to become the king, he has to go, in a sense, save his father. Now, in the very end, he, in this kind of dreamlike state, he catches the sword before it stabs his father in the back. And then his father says, you don't need to run anymore.
Wow.
It is so incredibly deep. And then he kills the demon. Right? He kills the darkness of life. He kills the pain, aggression, all the bad things
that hold you back.
Hold you back. And then he says, I would not have been able to become me without you. You make sense of the devil. I would not have been able to become the best version of me without you.
He says that to the villain. He says that to the demon, the villain, the bad guy.
Yeah. The villain who basically kills the thing that he loves so that he can gain power, but that also makes him the demon.
Do you think
it turns him into the demon?
Do you think this extremely metaphorical tale hurt this movie?
I think people didn't know what they were seeing. And so they're just like, what the fuck is this? And they walked out of the theater and they're like, what the fuck was that? And then went home and were like, yeah, that movie was weird.
Huh.
But I seriously feel like I watched it with Jordan Peterson eyes.
Yeah.
I mean, it envelops so much of just crazy shit that Jordan Peterson talks about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, dude.
Well, it's funny because they don't even mention Jordan Peterson in that interview with Joe Rogan.
Oh, yeah, no, you don't need to. It's more Jungian, really. I mean, Jordan Peterson is a young
Carl Jung, a student of Carl Jung.
And
Guy Ritchie might be the same. Guy Ritchie
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So Joseph Campbell, even Joe Rogan's like, are you a Joseph Campbell fan? It's like, I am a Joseph Campbell fan. You know, the hero of 1,000 faces, the hero's journey. These all kind of come from Joseph Campbell. So I feel like, and here's this, the first time I watched it, I cried when he finally faced the demon and caught the sword before it killed his father. Mm-hmm. Now it still happened, but this was in kind of dream state.
Yeah.
Right. Where he caught the sword before it killed his father. And then his father says, you don't need to run anymore. And then he goes and he fights the demon. And during fighting the demon, he's like, you know, I'm so glad that you did this to me because it made me strong. And he's like fighting him and he's overpowering him. You know, I'm grateful for you because he's saying these things. And I was just like, man, this is cheesy. I'm like, this is really cheesy. But then when he says, you make sense of the devil, it blew my fucking mind. I was like, wait a minute. What is Guy Ritchie saying here? It blew my mind because he all those things made me stronger. Now I'm the best version that I can be because you were fighting against me. And you make sense of the devil. This is why there's an adversary.
A struggle.
This is why there's a struggle. This is why Alex Hormozy had this great moment with Chris Williamson where he's just like, if you were a loving being and you wanted to help grow up an individual that was the best version they could be, would you put that individual through hard things or easy things?
Yeah, you'd put them through hard
things. Put them through hard things. And and seeing these little things throughout and then watching this film and he's like, you make sense of the devil. I was just like, that's, you tie it all in. Alex, Alex Harmozy talking with Chris Williamson and Jordan Peterson.
It's
and
all
like
kind of tied
good and
together.
evil, and it all kind of
Hard
falls in
hard
together.
things make you better. That's an athlete's. Any athlete's going to tell you anything hard is going to make you better.
Yeah, if you want to be the best athlete you can be, then you
Do really
train
hard
harder,
things.
right? You
Yeah.
do the harder thing.
And
Yeah.
so with that in mind, the proverb of the prodigal son is also mistakes make you better. Hard things and mistakes. You have to learn from the mistakes.
Learn the mistakes, right? Like if you never try, you'll never know, right?
And if you never make a mistake, you'll never know where your metal is tested.
Yeah. Tested. I mean, and you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Yeah.
And so, but when you take a shot, you're better for the next shot.
Yeah.
So,
like putting videos on YouTube.
let's go.
Yeah. Well, and to take it back to the conversation, I mean, the whole conversation with Joe Rogan and Guy Ritchie is very fascinating. It's very good. I would have loved to seen more from Guy Ritchie, because I think Guy Ritchie's coming into this renaissance of himself, because the last few movies he's made have been really, really good. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare was an excellent action film. And Wrath of Man was good. I would have liked to have seen some different cuts to that, because it felt like it was edited wrong. But other than that, it was a good movie. And The Covenant was an excellent, excellent movie. Probably one of the better modern war movies ever made.
We probably won't see a film as riddled with symbolism as King Arthur. He probably realized
it was too much.
This might have been too much.
Yeah.
And so we'll see it. I think we'll see it a little less heavy handed in other films. Mm-hmm. I mean, you really can kind of see it in things like The Covenant.
Well, if you're a filmmaker working on that level, you're thinking about chalking the whole thing full of metaphor as much as possible, which you run the risk. So there's a risk there, right? You're there. You want to put this metaphors in it. You want to put the symbolism in it, but you don't want to alienate the audience to the point where they're confused. So there's this really weird balance that you got to kind of try. And there's moments where if you're reading under the surface, you'll get what they're trying to say, but an audience that's not reading under the surface is going to just be confused by it. And I think that may have been the first time I watched it. I watched it again for us to go through it again, but the first time I watched it, I didn't like it because of those moments. Because of those moments felt, like you said, cheesy. It felt like, what's going on here? Like, why the stab in the back? Why did he turn into stone? Why? But if you're reading it and you're watching it with the metaphors in mind, then this is a truly rich viewing experience. Because the bad guy keeps turning into a demon, right? And it's like, wow, like men on a general sense, and women do this too, but men in a general sense are constantly fighting demons, constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were put there by our fathers. Some of them were put there by the way you were raised.
Mm-hmm.
You can't blame it though. You can't blame your upbringing. because you still are faced with choices. That's the Cain and Abel story. He blames God for his own choices.
Yeah, and using the wound or whatever pain to drive you
Drive you forward
to excel,
to find your kingdom, to get your kingdom,
to build your kingdom, and face your snakes, because that's the whole snake thing I thought was brilliant as well. There's a scene where the mage, now this dude, the use of women in this I loved, because that, I mean, Beauty and the Beast playing out right in the film, because he doesn't know when to become the king, but he has a female mage that comes and helps guide him to becoming the heir of his kingdom.
In a perfect world. In a perfect world.
Right. Well, I mean, femininity inspires us to do better, to be better, like,
or to be worse.
Not to put it on them, not to put that on them.
Yeah.
But this, and then she brings him the snake, and the snake bites him, and he has to, in a sense, he has to tame the snake. And then after he does that is when he goes back to the evil king, and then a giant snake shows up to free him. I mean, just like you tame your demons, and then your demons become your biggest ally. It just blows my mind, like the symbolism that was used in this film. It seems random that, and then the giant snake shows up. Yeah, well, this giant snake shook up everything so that he could be free. The tamed snake was what freed him.
Well, it happens in Christopher Nolan's Batman. He's like, why a bat? And he's like, because bats frighten me.
Yeah.
It's time
facing your demons.
It's time.
Exactly.
And then he goes, it's time my enemies feel my dread.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the whole point is like taking things that you think are holding you back, facing them, and then using them to your advantage.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I keep going. The Lady of the Lake looks like his mother. In fact, I would say she became, because when his mother's killed by the demon, she falls into the water.
And
then in the moment that he wants to give up seeking his kingdom, he throws the sword
away
into the water. And the Lady of the Lake brings it back to him. She takes him down into the depths, makes him face his demons, and gives him the sword.
It's unfortunate it didn't do better. Because could you imagine two more? Could you imagine two more by Ritchie?
Sign me up. And I hope that it gains such a cult following.
Yeah.
This is what I would love, that it gains a cult following, and then eventually they make a sequel, kind of like they did with Boondock Saints, even though that sucked. Anyways, but that aside, that's exactly what happened with Boondock Saints. Is it gained a cult following, and then they made a sequel.
I don't know if that's going to happen. So about a year ago, it caught a lot of play online because it was like the 10th movie on Netflix that was being watched. You know, Netflix does their little like 10 top stuff, and it was on there for a little while. So it did get a little bit of play that way. And this after school illustrated video, this idea that he's presenting, you always think of Hollywood people as being very shallow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this was so impressive is because he's like working at another level. He's like looking at the metaphor and the underlining meanings of things, and that's why I had so much more respect after watching this interview with him, because I mean, and I think, you know, he's talking a lot about his personal life too. He's talking, so he's saying that the world doesn't tell you who you are. You need to become who you are and stop listening to the world about who you are. You got to listen to that and think he's talking about his ex a little bit. Because
Possibly.
how many chimes has Madonna changed over the years? Madonna's been famous for 40 years now. And so she has like changed and changed and changed and changed. And it seems like she just doesn't know who she is, which is probably why the marriage failed. But it's really interesting to listen to, knowing his background. Most people don't know he was married to her. He's married to her for a long time too, like 10 or 15 years. I mean, he was married to her for a while. So he's an impressive filmmaker, and he's definitely got he's got a hell of a resume. His movies are hit or miss, for the most part. I usually like them. I loathe the Aladdin live action. I loathe all the Disney live actions. The cartoons are way better. It's an impressive video, to say the least. I mean, it's an impressive speech, and he talks so eloquently about it all. Like I think he screws up once. He calls a skiff a skillet, and it was funny. It's a funny little side note on that. He's like, "Oh, that's what you cook your chops on." So, I mean, a great interview, and I'm really pleased that the movie holds so much for you. I don't know if it holds that much for me. You know, I'm not a father of a son, so maybe that's part of it. I think you might identify with it better having a son.
I don't know.
But there's a place for the women in this as well, I think. So audience, if you get a chance, maybe go check out that movie. Maybe watch it with a eye to the metaphor. So it might be a better experience for you. Check us out on social media, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening to this and not watching it, please go to YouTube and like, share, and subscribe. And in the meantime, keep reading, keep listening, keep watching, learn more. We'll see you, brother.
See ya.
That's deep, Guy Ritchie. Is that something you think about all the time? Or is this like a cemented philosophy?
So, King Arthur, the story
Okay.
we just made. A man is a king, has a son. The father runs into a bit of aggro. The son jumps into a little boat, a little skillet, and he's not skillet. That's what you cook your chops on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Skiff, a little skiff. The skiff takes off down the river. He gets found by prostitutes. He's brought up in a brothel. He understands the ways of the street. He becomes a king on the street. He works his way out the different ladders, and then he pulls a sword from a stone at a certain point in his life, a certain point of evolution, and then from there he goes on to be the king. There's a bit of a tussle all along the way, lots of wrestling matches. In the end, he fights down his demons and he becomes the king.